Well, you find me in my comfort zone, or what would have been my comfort zone of many years ago, reliving my DJ past. And this was inspired by digging out a whole load of my old 90s house and dance vinyl from the garage. Got a whole bunch of it here. And just reliving what life used to be like. Playing off a vinyl, proper mixing, no sync buttons, no laptops to do it for you, just straight vinyl, turntables, pure skills, pure DJ tricks. Leaving the record diagonally in the box so you know where to file it again, so you can find all the stuff quickly, all arranged in BPM order. It's taken me back. And I decided to put together a bunch of mixes, which I'm calling The Sound of Then. Just coming across all this great vinyl again made me want to relive the sounds. So I'm going to be doing a series of these mixes. The first one I've just completed. It covers the 120 to 125 BPM spectrum. That's beats per minute for those of you that don't speak DJ. And the 2-hour mix is available now. I'll put the link to it in the descriptive notes below. Feels good to be back in the zone. That being said, let's start the video proper. That's what life used to be like for me before I became whatever it is I am now. Been on this path for 10 years, truth-seeking, and although I wouldn't change it for anything because I realise that's the ultimate purpose of my life, and it's the ultimate purpose of all our lives if we choose to embrace it and apply our will in that way. I can't help pining nostalgically every now and again for how simple and straightforward life used to be, and how fun and enjoyable life used to be, when all I used to live for was the next gig, the next party, going to clubs, doing DJ mixes, doing radio shows, travelling the world, meeting people. As the Wu-Tang Clan once observed, can it be that it was all so simple then? But we're in 2020 now, and it's a brave new world, it's a very different world, and we find ourselves having to navigate some very challenging times. So it's another weekend, another video, and I make these largely because people tell me that they find value in what I bring to them each weekend in terms of my thoughts and reflections and bringing together the happenings of the previous few days in hopefully some kind of meaningful and coherent way and putting some perspective on it. So it's very flattering to hear from people that they do find that kind of value in my output, though to be fair, I find myself just as confused and confounded as anyone else. I'm encountering a whole load of contradictory information, claims and counterclaims, misinfo, disinfo, information that could be any of the previous categories, and I'm trying to make sense of it the same as anyone else. I do my best with it, but I'm sure many other people would share my experience in terms of I will get a piece of news, land in my inbox or on my Facebook feed or in an email, and it will appear to be hopeful and positive and putting a very optimistic slant on the way things are playing out. The very next minute in that same inbox or on that same feed, I can find some information that either completely contradicts what I've just read or what I've just watched, or puts a different slant on it to suggest that things are very far from hopeful and optimistic, and in fact, there are dark days ahead. This happens literally daily, several times a day, and it does make it rather difficult to keep a lid on what's really going on out there and how we should be feeling about it all. But like I say, I do the best I can with what I've got. And just to sum up the process of this contradictory information and how our emotions can be up one minute and down the next, and many people correspond with me to tell me that this is their daily experience as well as mine, so I know I'm not alone in this. There was a great video put out by the YouTuber known as Amazing Polly just last week, and in the title of the video she asked the question, is this torture? And this is something that I touched on in my last video, suggesting that all the contradictions and all the counterclaims and all the conflicting information that we get, particularly through the mainstream, although we get it in the alternative media as well, does amount to systematic psychological torture. And when you have the governments of the world saying one thing 1 minute and then doing a complete 180-degree about turn the next, you have to ask yourself, is this really just incompetence? Them not knowing their arse from their elbow, not knowing what to do in a situation, or is it systematic psychological torture, mind games, manipulation, which has been strategically thought out and devised deliberately by those who specialise in this type of moulding of human thoughts and perceptions? So I'll give you a couple of excerpts from this video by Amazing Polly. She asks, is this torture? Although in reality that's a rhetorical question, because clearly she's of the opinion that it is, and she makes some very pertinent points which I'll go along with. Take a look at this.
Exploitation of wounds, I think, is the contact tracing. They tell you you've tested positive, even if you're showing no symptoms. They can tell you you've tested positive, and then they exploit that. They exploit your diagnosis to put you in this contact tracing Stasi tracking system. Sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation comes from the stress we're all feeling. Many people have told me that they have not been able to sleep a full night, or they wake up startled. You know, when you have bad anxiety and you wake up suddenly. Prolonged constraint, prolonged interrogation. What do they mean by prolonged? This was supposed to be 15 days to stop the spread, if you recall. Then it was 30 days to stop the spread. And how long is it now? They've given up even using that catchphrase because obviously it would be embarrassing for them at this point. Threats is the next category. It cultivates anxiety and despair. Well, there's threats all over the place from this thing. Let me start here. This is a collection of headlines. Some of these are from March. More will die unless people stay home, says Mayor Sadiq Khan. 250,000 will die unless stricter virus measures are adopted, warn scientists. Fauci warns COVID-19 cases could surge if stay-home orders lifted too quickly. Fulford Head warns more people will die unless social distancing happens. Restarting America means people will die, so when do we do it? Who warns of more deaths if lockdown is lifted? And there's been so many more since then. Those were from March. Think how often they've reiterated a second wave might come. If you don't do this, more people will die. You are putting immunocompromised people at risk with your selfishness, and you're going to cause massive suffering if you don't do what we say. So yes, threats are a main feature of this torture and coercion from the COVID response. There's other threats. I want to close with this because it addresses another objection I'm sure some will be thinking upon reading this, and that is that we have to do this. It's for the greater good. Well, Amnesty International had this to say when talking about torture. Those who consciously justify torture and are not candid enough to state that they use it to defend their own power and privilege rely essentially on the philosophic argument of a lesser evil for a greater good. They reinforce this with an appeal to the doctrine of necessity. The existential situation, COVID, forces them to make a choice between two evils. Allow freedom and liberty and have the virus spread? Or lock everyone down, take everyone's freedom and choices and financial well-being and relationships away, and maybe fewer people will get sick. That's what they're presenting to us, and some people are buying it. Look at this comment I saw on Twitter. These selfish jerks who refuse to wear masks and actively thwart the greater good have always existed. Trump just emboldened them, and the pandemic exposed our darkest flaw. Individualism, me, over collectivism. Invest in the benefit of all citizens. They have put this collectivist mentality into so many people that, in effect, the torturers are now being joined by many of their victims who are helping them torture their other fellow citizens.
So a good example of the apparently contradictory information that we're getting bombarded with all the time has come in just the last few days when we look at the activities of Donald Trump over there in the US. So first of all, we got the news that Trump has officially severed ties between the US government and the United Nations World Health Organization in terms of its modelling for predicting the future path of the coronavirus, supposed. and all the data that it's been providing. So Trump has broken ties with that organisation. Also, this week we hear that he's parted company with the treacherous Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is a bit of a soothsayer, because back in 2017 he predicted that this incoming administration will have to deal with a major pandemic. So he was right on the money there. He appears to be very accurate with his predictions. So Trump has now broken company with Fauci. So far so good, right? However, in the last few days also, we somehow have to reconcile all of that with the news that Trump has now formed an alliance with the Bill Gates-headed Gavi Vaccine Group Foundation. I mean, how is it possible Bill Gates isn't in jail yet? Some people will claim that he is, but how is it possible that individual is still roaming free and has not been called to answer for his crimes against humanity? I severely hope that that is something that is on the cards for the coming months. Either way, Trump now appears to have signed over $1.6 billion, according to reports, by way of the US government's pledge to the Gavi Vaccine Foundation. So that would appear to fly completely in the face of his previous actions, and it would imply that he's entirely on board with the monumental fraud that is the vaccination industry tied in with this COVID-19 scam, plandemic. Well, Bobby Kennedy Jr., no less, addressed this very subject in a couple of his social media postings of this week. Let's have a look at a couple of these. So on his Instagram account, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. first wrote, "President Trump's surprise pivot today consolidates Bill Gates' control over global health policy and the lives of every human. Gates has responded to our government's withdrawal of support for WHO by increasing his own contributions. His billion-dollar gifts to the health agency give Gates dictatorial powers over WHO's activities. US taxpayer dollars dramatically expand Gates' influence and power and gives presidential imprimatur to Gates' authoritarian vaccine and biosecurity agendas." However, subsequent to that, Kennedy later posted, and somebody's evidently put him on to some new information, "Thanks for this note. The confusion is my fault. After reposting that article, I did a deep dive on the Gavi funding package. While I confirmed the $1.6 billion transfer to Gavi through USAID, it appears that HHS approved the grant in February. This indicates that the primary culprit was Dr. Fauci and much less President Trump. I therefore felt that the headline I reposted was unfair and I removed it after 2 hours." So this could tie into the news that Trump has severed ties with Fauci as of this week, and that relationship is no longer in place. RFK Jr., Bobby Kennedy Jr., was also involved in an item which went all around the internet like wildfire this week, being spread left, right and centre, and it concerned a live chat that he was having on the subject of vaccines, where people were typing their comments in real time, and these were being displayed on the screen. At one point, somebody asks Bobby Kennedy Jr. to touch his nose if JFK Jr., his cousin, is still alive, as so many in the Q alternative research camp seem to feel he is. Have a look at his response. You've got to look at what he actually does. Don't worry about the words the other guy is speaking. Look at the text and look at Bobby's response. Elsewhere on the whole subject of the Q phenomenon, and yes, I'm fully aware that it divides opinion, the 200 messages I get a day from both sides of the fence stand as full confirmation of that to me. But whatever anyone's thoughts on it, there have been some very interesting shows put out on the whole subject of Q just recently, taking apart the whole thing in great forensic detail. David Whitehead put out a great show with his guest Bernhard Gunther just recently. Crow 777 Radio this week, the latest episode 233, Crow and Jason are going into that whole subject area for pretty much the first time, and they really went to town on it. That's well worth a listen. And Charlie Freak, who is the Marmite Man, because you either love him or hate him, it seems. He divides opinion as well, but that's okay. So Charlie has put out the third in what he describes as a trilogy of epic shows going into the whole subject of Donald Trump, what he's doing behind the scenes, he says, to take down the deep state, the Cabal, and how that ties in with the Q group, the whole Q movement. His latest 3-hour show was posted to YouTube just a few hours prior to me recording this video. When I went to take a look at it, it had already been blocked by YouTube on copyright grounds over some BS regarding an excerpt from ITV, which had been included, and they're claiming it breached copyright. It's an excuse to take the video down. So I'm hoping that Charlie's going to re-upload that to BitChute or some other platform. Keep a lookout for it, because this stands as part 3, he says, in the series which started with the 2 interviews that I did with him and Colleen, 3 hours apiece. And he states that in this latest one, he's bringing everyone up to speed on what you need to know about where we're at with the plan. Like I say, I know it's divisive, and there are contradictions and anomalies everywhere in this one as well. Even if you choose to pretty much go with the flow of what we're being told, there are many red flags, there are many obstacles which require some explaining, and I'm right there with you on that. I realise how people will feel about it, but I do hope that things will become clearer as the weeks progress, and some of the fog is going to clear in this confusing situation where we don't know whether dark and dismal days are all that lie ahead, or whether there is hope for optimism and positivity because change is in the air. I'm seeing evidence of all these things, to be honest with you. In the UK, last weekend, I was very inspired to see what appeared to be a spontaneous uprising against the BBC. This was incredible. This was outside the BBC's Broadcasting House headquarters, where a group of protesters, among them Piers Corbyn, who's doing some great activism at the moment, a real example to everyone as to how we shouldn't just put up with our rights and freedoms being taken away, but we should get very vocal about it, and we should get very passionate about communicating the injustice of all of this. So this group assembled outside Broadcasting House. They were chanting words and slogans to the effect that the BBC are paedophiles and protectors of paedophiles. Jimmy Savile was, of course, just the tip of the iceberg. It goes much, much deeper. And Broadcasting House itself has an infamous statue outside the main entrance, which I mentioned in my Musical Truth 1 book, carved by a notorious known paedophile by the name of Eric Gill. And the statue is known as Ariel and Prospero. It depicts a male adult with a naked child writhing against his crotch, and the male adult appears to be enjoying the experience immensely. So many of the protesters in the crowd were drawing attention to the fact that this statue provides a representation of the values that the BBC really stands for, and I was very inspired to see this gathering erupt seemingly unexpectedly out of nowhere.
Yeah, what happened to her? She was suicided! Murderers!
So I hear that further demonstrations of this nature may be taking place outside BBC Broadcasting House, so that's all good. There have been public demonstrations this week in Belgrade, Serbia, where crowds of largely young people have clashed with the authorities there. They've taken it to the streets, and they're protesting against the loss of their rights and freedoms that have been imposed by many of these lockdown measures. A similar situation erupted in Athens and Thessaloniki in Greece over the last couple of days, where crowds there have been clashing with police, and that whole situation turned pretty ugly with Molotov cocktails being thrown and all sorts. So either way, change is in the air, and in 2020 the rule book is out of the window, along with the planning calendar. Anything could happen. Here in the UK, or at least in England, I believe that the restrictions may still be in place a little more in Wales and Scotland. But as far as England is concerned, many of the lockdown measures continue to be lifted. We heard in the last 24 hours that gyms and swimming pools are going to be allowed to reopen from the 25th of July. Not from the 24th, mind. If you try and go to the gym on the 24th, you will die. So wait till the 25th, but then it's okay. So by my reckoning, that just leaves live music venues and nightclubs as the only kind of establishments which will not yet be reopened by the time 25th of July comes around. But this week, I went to a pub for the first time since March, went to meet a couple of people there, and it was almost like being back to normal. At least in my experience. I should point out that this was a Marston's pub, and the boss of that particular pub chain did publicly state a couple of weeks ago that he would not be imposing many of the draconian measures that we've heard about from other establishments. So you go to a Marston's pub and there's no queuing outside, there's no one-way system, there's no reminder to social distance, there's no mandatory temperature checks on arrival. You don't have to present government ID in the event that you might need to be traced afterwards if you're found to have been in close proximity to somebody with the virus. So I was able to walk straight in, walk straight up to the bar, no perspex screens, none of the staff are wearing masks, and apart from some hand sanitizer dispensers on the wall and a few arrows on the floor telling you what direction you have to walk to the bar in, it was almost like being back to normal. So that was an encouraging sign. That is the situation with Marston's. I do hear from other people that many other pubs are getting very totalitarian, and they are insisting on things like temperature checks, leaving your ID, and all of this. And the fact that Marston's is able to avoid all that proves that when you get this with other establishments, it's the landlords or the proprietors choosing to introduce these draconian measures for themselves. They're not required to do so. As with so many other things, it comes down to government advice and government guidelines rather than any kind of law. So these establishments are interpreting those guidelines in their own way. And if you find a pub that is trying to force you to undergo all these outrageous impositions on your rights and freedoms, I would suggest you leave those establishments alone and go and find yourself one where you are made to feel more welcome and where normality resides, because they are out there now. So we hear that from the 25th of July, gyms and swimming pools are able to reopen. So you can go there on the 25th, but don't try on the 24th. If you try and go to a gym on the 24th, you know what will happen. You will die. Wait till the 25th. So by my reckoning, that just leaves nightclubs and live music venues as the only types of establishments that will not yet be reopened by the 25th of July. So we might be able to have a relatively normal rest of summer, so long as the sickos don't try to pull their second wave stunt before then. There's been much talk about it in the media as if we're being subliminally prepared to expect it. I've seen signs from other parts of the world that lockdowns have been reintroduced on the basis of a second spike in so-called cases. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia has gone into a further 6 weeks of lockdown. That sounds outrageous. That sounds tragic. I heard Max Egan talking about this before he was deplatformed from YouTube, apparently this week, for criticising the Australian government. Things are pretty tough out in that part of the world. The Australian government full of absolute treacherous vipers and criminals that need to go. Same with New Zealand, same with many other parts of the world, but something about Australia and New Zealand, it seems particularly vicious out there. Also, Florida and Italy, I hear, or parts of Italy, have gone back into limited lockdown. So the signs are there that they might try and pull this stunt elsewhere. My advice would be enjoy the relative normality for as long as you can while it's there, because we don't know what's around the corner, but we may still be able to head this off by spreading knowledge, spreading awareness, winning over as many people as possible onto the side of truth by giving them fact-based information about all the lies, all the deceptions, all the provable falsehoods that have been peddled to us by government ministers, by health officials, by all kinds of experts, and especially by the mainstream media. That's what my leaflets were all about that I produced last week. I've sent out a ton of those to people all over the UK that have graciously volunteered to put them out in their areas. I don't have any more left now. They have all gone, so please don't ask for any more, although I will put the download link to these leaflets in the show notes below.
in case you want to grab a version of it for yourself and print it off and distribute it as you see fit. So we've got to keep the efforts stepped up to spread as much awareness as possible of what these liars and these criminals are hoping to achieve through this whole virus situation. And the question still remains in my mind as to what this whole thing being dragged out for as long as possible and being made as fearsome and scary in the minds of the masses as possible is masking and shielding. What else is going on that the controllers of this narrative don't want us looking at? They want everyone distracted, looking in one direction so they don't look in the other. We had the news of the arrest of Ghilane Maxwell last week. A lot of people have commented that there have been no photographs and no video footage of her arrest or her being taken into custody at all. So we've only got the word of the mainstream media to indicate that she has indeed been arrested. And of course, the mainstream media are not known for having a strong track record in telling the truth. So a lot of people seem to think that this may be some kind of ruse or some kind of scam. A lot of people think that her arrest or supposed arrest may be used to try and stitch up Donald Trump in some way with false allegations made towards him. We'll have to keep an eye on that one. The Adrenochrome Exposures, which took place on European TV, which I detailed in last week's video. Not much seems to have happened on that front. Unsurprisingly, the UK mainstream media has not covered it at all. I know a lot of people sent the Turkish mainstream news TV coverage of the celebrity adrenochrome industry to the BBC, inviting them to cover the story, but unsurprisingly, they declined. So that's another one we'll have to keep an eye on and try and keep the ball rolling on it. Well, here's another little snippet courtesy of the Daily Mail, which certainly adds weight to the idea that the Queen is gone. The royals are finished. Don't expect to see them anytime soon. Has the Queen left London forever? Up to 250 royal staff are offered voluntary redundancy. And it says, doubts over the Queen's return to London as Buckingham Palace feels the impact of the coronavirus crisis, the gift that just keeps on giving. And the article goes on to advise people not to expect to see the Queen in public. She may never return to London. And this ties into what I discussed in a video a few weeks ago, the idea that the Queen has either died, she's been arrested, she's in hiding. Whatever the case, the public is being primed for the end of this particular monarchy and for the Queen not to be seen in public ever again. Buckingham Palace appears to be shut down, deserted, and this story about 250 staff being offered redundancy from Buckingham Palace just reinforces that further. The royals are gone, I'm telling you. Whatever the case, it's over. Another thing I noticed this week on a trip to Tesco and Aldi, I know, the hardships we have to endure in life. Well, first of all, in Tesco, two of the managers were in one of the aisles with a scraper, and they were scraping up the tape that had been applied to the floor. And it was, the one-way system arrows and also the tape markers telling you where to stand. So they're scrapping their one-way system and they're scrapping a lot of these social distancing measures telling you where to stand. Same thing in Aldi, which was previously like Auschwitz, but now has scrapped their one-way system as well. So that's encouraging for however long it may be in place. But incredibly, I was unfortunate enough to happen across a Facebook chat thread amongst a group of women, housewives, and one of them was bemoaning the fact that she'd been to Tesco and that they have scrapped the social distancing and the one-way system. And she was saying, why have Tesco done this? It's so irresponsible when the virus is still around. They should never have taken these measures away. So there you go. Slaves calling for their further enslavement. And so many other women on that thread were saying, I know, it's outrageous. It came from head office and they're so irresponsible in what they're doing. And it's amazing that these people will trust the government and take them at their word when they first announce that there's a deadly virus and that we all have to change the way we live and lock ourselves away in our homes. They're okay with that. But when the government says it's okay to loosen things up a bit, folks, it's okay to return to relative normality, now the government's information isn't good enough for them. Now they know better than the government. Now they will challenge that information. But they didn't challenge it in the first place when all the lies were initially being told. So there's an obstacle to overcome, the slave mentality that still exists out there, and people actually embracing and seemingly reveling in their own slavery and restrictions on their freedom of movement. I don't want to end the video on a negative tone because I never like to do that. We are in an uncertain period right now. As I've mentioned at different points in this video, things could still go either way. And I hope that I've given you a few glimpses of hope and optimism, as well as some of the darker stuff. I honestly don't know how things are going to pan out, but I continue to keep a close eye on things, and each week as I bring you these videos, I will bring you up to speed on my perspectives, what I've come to discover in the previous few days, and try to piece it all together in hopefully some kind of coherent and meaningful way. Not always difficult with all the contradictions there are out there, but I hope this video has been of some use to people. I am told that my videos bring some sort of stability and some sort of sanity to a lot of people's lives each week, and I'm happy to be of service in that way. So come back in 7 days for the next one. Hope everyone stays sane and stays as free as they can in the intervening days. And thanks again for watching. Thanks again for all the support. And do enjoy the sound of then, that nostalgic 90s house and dance mix, because music speaks when words fail, and music can give you upliftment and positivity and escapism like nothing else. It's certainly worked for me throughout my life. See you soon.